Hey everyone, this is Michelle at East Ave Art, and today I'm going back to my roots and painting this fun coffee illustration. I've attached this sketch to in the description if you'd like to trace it and do this on your own. So once I do the sketch, I transfer it to my Etchr Sketchbook here, and you can see that I am getting my paints wet with my little spray bottle, and I'm going to start mixing up some reds. I wanted to have a red coffee mug today. Just seemed like a color I don't usually paint with. I like to mix in a few different shades of red to get the kind of brightness and vibrancy that I'm looking for. So next I'm going to start mixing up my coffee colors. You could see I was pausing a little bit because it is kind of tough, I think, to decide which colors to choose to get that creamy foam look on the top of a latte. So I mixed up some shades of ochre yellow and some maybe creamier yellows, and I think I put a little bit of white in there, and I decided to darken this one up a little bit because I kind of want three colors. I think just the actual coffee color that you see me mixing up there, which should be a rich brown, and then I sort of want a mid-tone brown for the areas where some of the foam has already started to mix in, and then I want, the lightest shade would be for obviously where, the cream has just been sort of poured in. Okay, so now that I have mixed up some of my colors already, I'm ready to hit the page, and I'm going to do a few layers with my mug and saucer. So right now I'm just putting down the base layer, and the nice part about watercolor is you can always build up the color with layers until you're happy. So I think it's best to start with kind of a more watery consistency, because you can't go backwards. You can't make things lighter. You can only darken them, at least in watercolor world. I know it's different with acrylics and gouache where you might tend to go from dark to light. Watercolor is the opposite in that way. So I would start with, tentatively, maybe isn't the right word, but gently. So start with, the lightest version that you think that you might want. And, if you're not satisfied, you can always build up from there. Like, I know personally, I don't really paint with red very often because it's sort of a color that oddly annoys me, because I feel like it never seems to create like a smooth finish to me, right, on the first layer. And it's never quite vibrant. Like, I'm sort of looking at this initial layer that I have. It looks very uneven. It also looks a little dull to me. So, and here you see I am actually darkening up my base color. I added a little bit of purple and a little bit more red to get a thicker consistency, because I've decided that the shadow is going to fall on the right side of the coffee mug. So one of the things that you'll want to be thinking about as an artist is where your light source is. So in my view, the light is on the side of the page where you see that binder clip hanging out at the top of my sketchbook. So that's where the light is coming from, which means the far end, the furthest end of the coffee mug is going to not be getting as much light. So I want to make that a little bit darker. And I brought the darkness like maybe close to halfway through on the mug, but that ultimately is, I think, giving it a little bit of a sense of roundness It gives it a little bit of a 3D there. And while I was blabbing about that, you'll notice I also painted in a little bit of a shadow where the white inside of the mug wouldn't be precisely white. It's kind of resting in a shadow if you think about how the light would be hitting the mug. So I had mixed up a very, very watery light blue to get that effect there. And here I am moving on to the handle. And I'm just gonna again paint that with my kind of watery consistency there, because again I can build up that layer of paint as much as I'd like later. I'm gonna let my mug dry and move on to painting my first layer on the actual coffee. And I can do this because I know that section won't be touching any part of the paint that's still wet. And so just to reiterate, I'm starting with the lightest color of coffee that I'm going to use, that foamy color. So that color isn't going to be the entirety there. I'm obviously going to add more of those other colors I've mixed up around. So full disclosure, I think that I kind of made a mistake here. I had this great layer of wet paint of, my lightest shade, and I really think I should have tried to do a wet into wet approach where I would add in the darker colors and get sort of a bit of a natural appearance by doing that. But for some reason, before I had a chance to really do that, I turned around and did some erasing on my saucer where I didn't want, the pencil line to come through. Not really sure why I did that, but fortunately, my lightest color paint was still a little bit wet. So I'm getting some nice blending action going on. And it's really kind of giving like a nice natural effect. And I think I don't want too much of the color, the darker color to bleed out into the light. So I'm going to stop there and move on to the saucer that matches the mug. So even though I think I made a mistake there with my approach to the coffee, I did rectify a previous mistake that I made in another tutorial last March, where I was doing a similar composition. I was painting a St. Patrick's Day coffee latte that kind of looked a little like the Shamrock Shake, I think. And I, last minute, in the middle of the painting, decided to paint a saucer without having drawn it in. So kudos to me. I learned from that mistake because it was a big old mess and wobbly and goofy looking. And so I took the time on the front end to make sure that I drew a saucer that has the appropriate dimensions this time. I wanted to paint some coffee beans on my saucer as well, so I'm leaving some blank space there for that. But then I was really not loving the tone of the red, so I didn't really even wait for it to dry before I started adding more layers, just kind of out of frustration, I think. Okay, so I sped us forward because you didn't want to watch me paint around those coffee beans. It was a little bit dipsy doodling. So I've moved back into my coffee, obviously, and I'm now taking the mid-range color that I mixed up because I want there to be a little bit of a barrier between the foam and the darkest color of coffee, which will be in the center, just because that would sort of naturally be what it would look like if you've ever looked very closely at your coffee when you're pouring your creamer in there in the morning. One thing that I like to do if I'm starting to see some like harsh edges, is I will clean off my brush and take, dry it off a little bit. So it's just kind of like a damp, clean brush. And I'll sort of scrub a little bit at the paint. And the other thing I might do as well is drop in while it's still wet some fresh paint there. So I've kind of recreated that wet into wet effect. And hopefully you're starting to see some dimension taking shape. Like, I think that mid-range color looks like it's a little bit higher than the center color. And that's kind of what I'm going for, is to give the look of what's going to be, bubbles and frothy on the surface. And here I am just kind of painting in the coffee beans while I wait for the coffee to dry. So again, I mixed up a very light blue to sort of approximate white, and I'm painting that around the exterior of my saucer to kind of create like a little white border that you might see on a saucer. Okay, so I'm gonna reactivate my mug paint color because I am going around the rim of the mug. And this is kind of delicate work, which is why you can see me sticking my head really close. Sorry, I don't realize that I'm coming into frame. That's kind of embarrassing. But you'll also notice that I move my sketchbook around just to get the best angle, because this is kind of like really fine work. You don't want to mess with the proportions, and it's like, oh, you're so far into the painting that it's like, oh, if I screw it up now, I'm going to be so mad. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward through this part because it would be maddening for you to watch me do this the whole time. And I'm moving on to adding in my third color of coffee, which is the darkest, richest color. So that's kind of like obviously what the color of coffee is. And I think it really starts to look neat when it all comes together because you can see, I think that the foam is clearly sitting on top of that coffee. Like you can see the depth in that picture. And I think using the three colors, like the lightest, the mid-tone, and the darkest, sort of achieves that. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry and I'm going to think about that, and I'm actually going to introduce another mistake. So one of the things that I think I mentioned earlier is that the light source to me is coming from the direction of where you see the binder clip. So of course this particular coffee and saucer would be creating a shadow to the right, if the sun is, or the light source is coming from the left, you'll see the shadow extending into the right. I just wasn't really, when I thought about it later, you'll see I'll kind of change up how I did this because I wasn't really very happy with the lack of 3D on my saucer with this. It seems very like kind of flat on the ground. So I'll point out when I finally see it and start to make some changes. But what I'm working on currently, as you can see, is, sort of recognizing that the coffee mug would also be, making a shadow on my saucer. And I'm trying to build those shadows up again to show the 3D nature of this painting and to keep like a consistent logical light source. So continuing with this theme of where the light source is coming from, I also wanted to put a little bit of a shadow on the left side of the saucer because a saucer sort of curves up. So even if the light is coming from the direction of the binder clip, that little part of the side of the left hand side of the saucer would still be cast in shadow if it's curved up slightly like you typically see a saucer is. It's not flat like a plate typically. And I think that thinking about the dimensions of the saucer is where you see me recognize that I have made a bit of a mistake, and fortunately I can paint red over my shadow and kind of show like sort of the bottom part of the saucer, the way it would curve up, because obviously it's not flat like a plate is. So I'm just kind of adding that little bit of what you would see underneath this curved saucer. So with that, I'm going to add a little bit more color and vibrancy with another layer on my mug. It was looking a little drab, I thought. So here I am just kind of adding a brighter layer of red there. I'm also going to add some more layers to the handle so that kind of matches it well as well. And just like with the mug, I had added, you saw me earlier adding like a little bit more of the darker color under the rim and along the side of the mug where, you know, the light wouldn't be hitting it quite as strongly. I'm also going to try to put layers of, you know, darker paint on the mug handle once it dries up a little bit. So you can see I'm fixing up some of the shadow colors on my saucer currently. Okay, so now I have brought out my white gouache, and white gouache is one of my favorite little secrets to enhance my paintings. Once I get towards sort of the end of the painting, I like to sort of take out my white gouache. Somebody I was reading recently on Instagram referred to white gouache as adding frosting to your painting, and I thought that was really funny. But I'm really just trying to capture a little bit of sort of the reflection that you would see on the bubbles in your coffee, and so I think the little dots of white gouache do a good job of reflecting that. So one thing that I forgot to hit record on was that I actually added a shadow on the left hand side in my coffee to show where the rim would be also casting a shadow. Okay, so I added some white highlights to my coffee beans. I think if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have included them. I don't really think they did too much for the composition. And I'm just putting the white highlight also in a few notable areas on the coffee mug and saucer. And I'm pretty close to being, really finalizing this. I'm not great at knowing when to stop though, so that sometimes can be a problem. Okay, well, here you have it. Here is my final version, and I hope you enjoyed watching this, and hopefully you'll paint along with me. Please like and subscribe to see more content like this. Thanks so much for watching.